Well, it's lovely to be out on such a sunny evening in Edinburgh, but it's a shame that we have to be out tonight protesting against the two-child cap and the rate clause, well more than a year since Alison Thulis, my colleague at Westminster, first spotted it in the small print of a Tory budget.
Very glad to see such a huge demonstration today and so many people still coming along 1 year after the rate clause came into force to show their opposition to this vile and despicable policy. The UK government have never been able to justify this policy, and we saw that this week with Esther McVeigh's pathetic attempts to say that the rate clause was somehow double support for women and that gives them some kind of chance to talk about the most appalling and disturbing experience of their life.
As you can see behind me, we're at the very beginning of the All Under One Banner rally. You can obviously hear the pipers behind me as events are about to kick off.
It's time to aim high, look resolutely outwards, and never, ever accept second best. Above all, it's time to believe that we can. We can build that better country we know is possible. And friends, we will.
If you enjoy watching our programmes, please help us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster by signing up to become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter.
Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles, and all the opinions you'll need. Whether it's digital or by post, subscribe now to iScot.
Good morning. The first item of business this morning is consideration of business motion 17582 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau setting out a business programme. And could I call on Maurice Golden to move this motion?
Moved.
Thank you very much. And no member wishes to speak on the motion. The question therefore is that motion 17582 be agreed. Are we agreed? Thank you. Yes. Thank you. Mr Lyle. And just for information, that's just to make sure members know that the business this afternoon starts at 2 o'clock, not at 2:30, so that's what the change is for. Business at 2 o'clock. So we're going to turn now to general questions, and our first question is from James Dornan.
To ask the Scottish Government when it last met the SQA and what was discussed.
Cabinet Secretary Richard Lockhead, or Minister, sorry. No, Richard Lockhead. Yeah. There we are.
Thank you, and thank you for the promotion, Presiding Officer. Can I just answer the question by saying that the Deputy First Minister holds regular meetings with the Chair and Chief Executive of SQA, and he last met both on Tuesday the 16th of April, where a range of matters were discussed, and Scottish Government officials are also in regular contact with SQA officials.
James Dornan.
I thank the Still Minister for that response. Considering the Sultan of Brunei's deplorable views towards his gay subjects, including, unbelievably, the attempted introduction of death by stoning until international pressure forced him to U-turn, does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that the SQA should reconsider its links with Brunei and reaffirm their role as an equalities champion for Stonewall?
Minister.
The new legal regime in Brunei, which oppresses so clearly the country's LGBTI community, is of course abhorrent, as I'm sure we all agree, and has no place in the modern world. Although independent of ministers, as a public body, SQA has a duty to contribute to the advancement of equality. And with that in mind, SQA carries out due diligence for all of its contracts and has regard to Scottish Government policy and Foreign Office advice and guidelines. SQA approves all its centres, including international centres, to the same standard, and every centre offering SQA qualifications must ensure that there are no discriminatory barriers and everyone eligible to take a qualification has an equal chance of benefiting. The standards include a requirement for the centre to have a number of policies and procedures in place, including a candidate equal opportunities policy and a candidate's complaints policy. So I hope that gives a reassurance of the Government's position and SQA's position on these matters to James Dornan.
And Liz Smith.
Thank you. Could the Minister just confirm that the organisation of this year's SQA diet of exams was highly successful and that no major issues have been reported to the Scottish Government?
Minister.
Well, as the member can imagine, we are in regular contact with the SQA on a whole range of issues, and they have assured us that the 2019 exam diet and all the activity in connection with that remains on track. And of course, given some of the other issues they're dealing with just now, we have agreed contingency plans with the SQA and partners to ensure there's no disruption to the qualifications and awarding system.
Question number 2, Johann Lamont.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to reports that Glasgow City Council has received more than 14,000 requests to deal with rats since 2016.
Minister Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm aware of recent media reports about the number of rats Glasgow City Council dealt with since 2016. Under Section 2 of the Prevention of Damage by Pests Act 1949, local authorities in Scotland are obliged to take such steps as necessary to ensure that as far as practicable their district is kept free from rats and mice. Glasgow City Council does this through its own in-house pest control team, discharging their statutory responsibility through this and by ensuring that there is adequate waste collection services to households, which is a duty set out within the Waste Scotland Regulations 2012 and the Environmental Protection Act 1990.
Johann Lamont.
Thank you. Does the Minister share my concern at the scale of this problem and the implications for the health and well-being of the citizens of Glasgow, that no matter what the responsibilities of the Council are, there is clearly a serious problem here? When will the Scottish Government accept that its choice to make substantial cuts to Glasgow's budget is having a direct impact on the frontline services that we all rely on? And when will the Minister take responsibility and ensure that Glasgow gets the fair funding it so evidently needs to keep our streets clean and our citizens healthy?
Minister.
I do share concerns about the increase of pests wherever it happens. However, I don't share Ms Lamont's view about local government funding, because this government has been extremely fair over the years in terms of the settlement that there has been to Glasgow and to the 31 other local authorities. Glasgow City Council is currently investing £6.5 million into a 3-phase bin replacement programme, which will replace approximately 48,000 existing small dustbins with 80,000 larger capacity wheel bins to prevent overflowing, which can attract pests. That programme could have been done previously under the previous Labour regime, but it has taken an SNP-led council to sort out these problems.
Question number 3, Bill Bowman.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government when NHS Tayside's next annual report on drug deaths will be published.
Minister Joe Fitzpatrick.
I understand the Tayside Drugs Death Review Group plans to publish its annual drugs death report this month. This will include information on all drug-related deaths that occurred in Tayside in 2018. National Records Scotland is expected to publish its annual report on national drug death statistics in July.
Bill Bowman.
I thank the Minister for that response. ISD Scotland published data last week showing that over the past 20 years, there was a 4-fold increase in the rate of drug-related general acute hospital stays. This includes a critical increase of admissions by approximately 50% across Tayside, driven by the region's most deprived citizens over the last decade. Does the Minister agree this state of affairs is devastating for the people affected? And can he advise the Chamber what is being done to address deprivation levels which are reaching a breaking point across NHS health boards?
Minister.
I absolutely think the levels of people who are suffering harms and death from drug-related harm is an emergency in Scotland. That is why we have a new drug strategy which is intended to look at the services that we currently provide within the competences we currently have. But I think it's also important that we look at the options in terms of reducing harm, which are not currently devolved to this Parliament. And I would strongly urge the UK Government to accept the public health emergency which we are in and support the proposals for a safe consumption space in Glasgow.
Question number 4, Liam McArthur.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what assessment is made of the provision of mental health services in Orkney.
Minister Joe Fitzpatrick.
The Scottish Government wants everyone to be able to access mental health services and to get the help that they need when they need it. We are supporting health boards across Scotland to achieve this through £54 million funding over the next 4 years for capacity building and improvement support. An additional £250 million of investment in mental health through Programme for Government and funding for an extra 800 mental health workers. Funding for this will rise to £35 million per year by 2021-22. The Scottish Government expects NHS Orkney and their partners, including the Health and Social Care Partnership and NHS Grampian, which also provides specialist care, to ensure that there is appropriate provision of mental health services for residents on the island.
Liam McArthur.
I thank the Minister. In her review of Orkney's mental health provision in 2017, Professor Linda Gass identified the need for increased capacity in CAMHS services as, quote, urgent. With an increase in referrals, the pressure on the local CAMHS team has only intensified since then. I'm also aware of specific concerns in relation to the availability of support for those affected by eating disorders. Will the Minister therefore undertake to work with the local board to ensure any existing gaps in CAMHS and the wider mental health team are filled as soon as possible? And following my exchange with Claire Hawkey last November, will Ministers also review the issue of patient transfers to Cornhill, which now requires staff, including CAMHS staff, to travel from Orkney, thus impacting on scheduled appointments and putting additional pressure on an already stretched service?
Minister.
Long waiting times for CAMHS treatment and support are unacceptable, so I thank the member for raising this particularly important point. We expect all health boards to deliver the standard that 90% of patients are seen within 18 weeks of referral, and the Scottish Government is currently working with NHS Orkney to agree their annual operational plans, including how they will deliver the standards. The member additionally mentioned the issue in relation to Cornhill and the transfers and the service level agreement. Of course, there is a matter between the health boards. I understand that NHS Grampian have confirmed to officials that they have adequate mental health nursing capacity for the provision of services, but the Scottish Government expects that health boards to meet those service level agreements and ensure appropriate provision of mental health services for residents. I understand that NHS Orkney and NHS Grampian are currently reviewing the service level agreement, which will be an opportunity to address the particular issues of patient transfers, and the Minister for Mental Health has, I understand, asked officials to look at that matter further. I know that the Minister is also aware of the particular issues around Cornhill, and I'm sure the Minister will be content to discuss that matter further with the member.
Thank you. Question number 5, Angus MacDonald.
To ask the Scottish Government when it last met Falkirk Council to discuss its plans for 1,000 new social and affordable homes by 2024.
Minister Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scottish Government officials last met Falkirk Council to discuss its affordable housing programme on the 15th of May 2019. I'm pleased to say we remain on track to meet our ambitious 50,000 target and are proud of our record on delivering affordable homes in communities right across Scotland, over 82,000 since 2007. Over this Parliament, £50 million is being made available to Falkirk through the Affordable Housing Supply Programme, investment that has already supported the delivery of 295 homes over the first 2 years of the programme. In relation to housing delivery beyond the current programme, we are committed to continue to promote increased supply across all tenures and build on our More Homes Scotland approach. And we are working with stakeholders to develop a shared vision for our homes and communities for 2040 and a longer-term approach to housing delivery, which will help make it a reality.
Angus MacDonald.
I join the Minister in welcoming Falkirk Council's ambitious plans. However, at a recent briefing at the Council, I was informed that according to the Affordable Housing Supply Programme benchmark, the Council receives between £57,000 and £59,000 per unit. However, RSLs for most areas of the Falkirk Council area receive up to £72,000 and for rural areas £74,000 per unit. Can the Minister advise why there is this unequal treatment of local authority housing services in relation to grants, tax and other forms of subsidy compared to RSLs, and will he commit to reviewing the situation with a view to a fairer outcome, not just for local authorities but for tenants and council tenants in particular?
Minister. Presiding Officer, our grant subsidy benchmarks are in line with the recommendations of a working group which both COSLA and the Association of Local Authority Chief Housing Officers were represented at. Benchmarks are not fixed grant amounts, which is important. It means that there is flexibility to approve additional subsidy if required to enable higher cost projects to proceed. If a project is found to be deliverable and provides value for money, we will support it. And beyond that, in terms of flexibility, I've said it before in this chamber, but if an authority is looking to build more specialist housing, including wheelchair accessible housings, and larger bedrooms, homes with more bedrooms, then we will look to be very flexible indeed with subsidy levels.
David Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. When the Minister next meets Falkirk Council to talk about affordable housing, can he raise the issue of sprinklers? He will know that government's adopted my bill to ensure sprinklers in all new housing by 2021. This will ensure the safety of tenants and avoid another Grenfell Tower.
Minister.
I'm very happy always to hear suggestions from Mr Stewart. He and I have worked cooperatively in ensuring his vision for sprinklers becomes a reality in our social housing in the near future. I am always happy to ensure that local authorities know about our future plans when it comes to building and fire safety, and he can be assured that that will continue to be in the agenda when I meet every local authority.
Question number 6, Peter Chapman.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what plans it has to invest in the Scottish Ambulance Service.
Cabinet Secretary Jean Freeman.
The ambulance service will receive baseline funding of £259.9 million in this financial year, an increase of £9.2 million over the previous year, to support the ambulance service strategy, which sees patient treatment delivered out of hospital where it is safe to do so. Investment totalling £24.6 million since 2016-17 has been made.
Peter Chapman.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Last year's figures showed response times in Aberdeenshire areas like Turriff and Mearn suffering some of the worst response times at an average of 18 and 15 minutes, well out with the 8-minute target. And a recent report by Unison said that Scottish ambulance staff were being overworked and patients being put at risk by Scottish Government underfunding. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that this is unacceptable, and how does she propose to improve emergency response times in rural areas of the north east of Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
So I don't accept the central premise of this, that there is underfunding to our ambulance service. Mr Chapman, I'm sure, has familiarised himself with the strategy, which now has significant external evidence from across the UK that it remains a valid model and implementation is on track. In the next year, the ambulance service will concentrate on further development of their clinical response model, including improvements to lower acuity calls, development of their workforce, continued investment in fleet equipment and new technology, and quality improvement work, all of which is designed to improve their response times, particularly in lower acuity calls. And in terms of the recent Unison survey, of course we take these matters very seriously, as do the ambulance service, and with Unison they are involved in the Demand and Capacity Implementation Group, which is looking precisely at the issues that Mr Chapman addresses. So we'll continue to take these matters seriously and to make progress with our ambulance service.
Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Firefighters in 2 areas of my constituency, Turriff and Maud, participated in a trial scheme launched in 2015 that saw specially trained firefighters deployed to administer vital CPR or use a defibrillator to try and save people who were experiencing cardiac arrest. I've spoken with firefighters in Turriff who participated in the trial, and they are very keen to use their skills. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise if and when this will be rolled out?
Cabinet Secretary.
The primary aim of these out-of-hospital cardiac arrest co-response trials is to reduce response times to incidents with the longer-term aim of improving patient outcomes. The trials involved 18 stations, responded to 276 incidents. Scottish Fire and Rescue Service made 83 potential life-saving interventions with 28 positive results. Given these outcomes, the trials, I think, can be considered a success, and I am very keen to see this work rolled out. However, there are ongoing discussions and negotiations with the Fire Brigades Union and management in terms of the remodelling of the firefighters' role. That continues, and while those negotiations are underway and continue, the involvement of the Fire and Rescue Service in this work has been paused.
Question number 7, Maureen Watt.
To ask the Scottish Government what steps it is taking to deliver superfast broadband to rural communities.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
The £400 million Digital Scotland Superfast Broadband programme has already delivered truly transformative results across all Scotland's local authorities, providing fibre broadband access to over 930,000 homes and businesses so far, with Think Broadband figures showing that over 93% of Scotland's premises can now access superfast broadband of 30 megabits per second and above. The equivalent figure for Aberdeenshire is 81.7%. Our £600 million Reaching 100% programme will deliver resilient and future-proof broadband infrastructure that will ensure every home and business in Scotland can access superfast broadband services regardless of remoteness or rurality.
Maureen Watt.
I thank the Minister for that answer. Openreach are responsible for delivering broadband in the Old Port Lethen area of my constituency. Unfortunately, due to long lines, the community are experiencing frustrating speeds and either have to wait for the R100 programme to deliver faster broadband by 2021 or engage in the Community Fibre Partnership. Can I ask what the support the Scottish Government can give to ensure a faster and more cost-effective solution can be found to tackle communities affected by long lines?
Minister. Well, certainly, I should say at the outset, I very much recognise the challenge that Maureen Watt has set before us. Clearly, as Ms Watt is aware, these are reserved issues, but we are trying to use our resources to try and tackle them. We recognise that there's certainly a source of great frustration for those who are affected. We are obviously deploying R100, as I said, and I appreciate Ms Watt's point around the fact that people are concerned to be waiting for that. There is also gain share funding through the DSSB deployment, which has continued through 2018-19, will continue to during the rest of 2019, extending coverage as far as possible. And it is also, for communities still struggling with poor connectivity, interim solutions such as the UK Government's Better Broadband and Rural Gigabit voucher schemes, which do exist. However, they may not deliver services at 30 megabits per second or better, but they may provide an interim solution while R100 is under development.
Thank you. And that concludes general questions. We're going to turn now to First Minister's questions. Question number 1, Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And before I begin, I'm sure today we'll all want to recognise the bravery and sacrifice made by the service personnel who 75 years ago this morning took part in the D-Day landings, and all of us owe them a debt we can never repay. Presiding Officer, we've heard a lot in recent weeks about the difficulties faced by teachers due to staff shortages and subject choice restrictions. And we're now learning more, that in many schools, teachers are having to teach different qualification levels of the same subject in the same class,
at the same time. So that's pupils of different ages studying different topics for different exams, all thrown in together. The Education Secretary said last week that he, and I quote it, had never heard anybody argue that educationally there was something wrong with it. Does he stand by that statement?
Deputy First Minister.
President Officer, before I respond to Ruth Davison's question in its substance, I want to make clear to the Chamber that I am deputising today for the First Minister as she is in Normandy for the 75th anniversary commemoration of the D-Day landings. The First Minister is honouring those who fought fascism, defended democracy and gave their lives for our freedom. As we look around our world today, we must all remember the debt we owe the D-Day generation, and now as then, we must stand together against those who would choose the road of fascism in our society. In relation to the point of substance that Ruth Davison raises with me on education, multi-level teaching has been a feature of the education system in Scotland for many years. It was a feature of the multi-level teaching of the education system when I was going through it all those years ago, and it has been a part of the system. Clearly, there is an active debate about the issues around subject choices, but I certainly stand by my remarks that multi-level teaching is able to be delivered effectively within our schools by teachers who are trained to deliver professionalism of that quality and of that standard.
Ruth Davison.
Thank you. The thing is, I'm not sure how the Education Secretary could have missed the largest teaching union, the EIS, say that there's been an explosion in the number of combined classes, which is putting teachers under increasing pressure. Or the NASUWT union, which says this issue is causing intolerable workload or stress. Or the Association for Science Education saying that teaching a combined class is like spinning two plates at once. Or Principal Teacher Ian Aitken telling Parliament that it's a disgrace that schools actually have National 4, National 5 hires and advanced hires in the same classes. Or Marjorie Kerr, the President of the Scottish Association of Geography Teachers, saying the exams are not aligned to be taught that way and that National 5 pupils are definitely disadvantaged if they end up in a higher class because the courses do not match up. Now that the Education Secretary has heard the arguments against combined classes, does he recognise that all these people have a point?
Deputy First Minister.
Of course I recognise there's a debate to be had. There's a debate to be had about every single topic within education. Yeah. Education is a part of our society that is actively the subject of debate. And what I'm interested in is making sure that our education system delivers the best outcomes possible for the young people of Scotland. And on that, the evidence is substantial that the education system is doing exactly that. We see young people now achieving more within our schools. We see attainment at level 6 rising within our society, equipping young people with the qualifications that they require. And we also see young people leaving school to the highest level of positive destinations on record in our history. So I suggest... So I recognise there's a debate to be had, but I also want to make sure that we don't lose sight of the phenomenal achievements that young people are making in our education system today.
Ruth Davison.
Presiding Officer, the Education Secretary has said that there is no evidence of the explosion in multi-level teaching that the EIS talks about. Indeed, he says it's been a factor in Scottish education forever. Well, we have the evidence because we sent Freedom of Information requests to all 32 local authorities and we asked them how many combined classes there are in their schools. And of the 238 schools we've got back, 112 have classes where there are 3 qualification levels being taught in the same classroom, and a further 11 schools where there are 4 levels being taught. Like Inverclyde Academy, where maths is being taught for National 4, National 5, Higher and Advanced Higher, all in the same classroom. We will give the Education Secretary all of the evidence that he asks for, but the question is, will he act on it?
Deputy First Minister.
I think this is where we get into some of the interesting fault lines and contradictions in the Conservative position here. Because I believe fundamentally in empowering the schools of Scotland to decide exactly how the curriculum should be delivered. That's what I believe in. That's what.
I don't believe that.
They don't believe that.
That's what.
Okay, order, please, order.
That's what this Parliament supported when it supported Curriculum for Excellence.
Yes.
A flexible curriculum to put power back into our teaching profession to enable them to deliver on behalf of the people of Scotland. And what we are now seeing in our schools, as I've said already, is rising attainment by our young people. We are seeing an improvement in the destinations available for young people. We are seeing a rising number of teachers available to teach in our classrooms, a record level since 2010, and we see rising resources being put into schools, including £750 million from this government directly into the hands of schools and local authorities to close the poverty-related attainment gap. That's the investment we are seeing in Scottish education, and that's why it's delivering results for the young people of Scotland.
Ruth Davidson.
I'm sure the schools of Scotland are delighted to hear they've been empowered by this Education Secretary into staff shortages and subject choice restrictions. But the point is this, Presiding Officer. The point is this. A week ago, the Education Secretary told Parliament that he had never heard anybody say that there was anything wrong with combined classes and that there was no data to suggest that the problem was widespread. Well, I've come here today and we've given him the arguments from the experts and we've given him the data. So after 12 years of government, isn't it time we had ministers in charge who are prepared to face up to the challenges in our schools, not deny that they exist? Or is it the case that defending their failed record matters more to this government than educating our young people across the country?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, I engage with the education system more than anybody else in this chamber on a daily basis. And yesterday, while Ruth Davidson was cooking up the latest moan fest to bring to Parliament, I was at the Scottish Education Awards, listening to case by case, the length and breadth of the country, on literacy, numeracy, on attainment, on achievement, on the long service of our teachers. Listen to all these fabulous examples, while Ruth Davidson was cooking up the moan fest to bring to Parliament today. That's how I spent my day yesterday. And crucially, what matters is not the litany of complaints that Ruth Davidson brings to this Parliament. What matters is what is being achieved. What matters is what is being achieved by the young people of Scotland. Attainment is rising, more hires, positive destinations improving year on year. That's what Scottish education is determined to deliver. That's what it is delivering. That's what I'm happy to celebrate. And I'm not going to take any moan fest from Ruth Davidson on the subject.
Question number 2, Richard Leonard.
Presiding Officer, today is a day for reflection on the sacrifice and the courage of those who liberated France and so liberated Europe. We owe them a huge and enduring debt. The Scottish Government urgently needs to consider how they can progress their income supplement quicker, or, if this is not feasible, what interim measures could help. The Commission strongly feels that many families need additional money in their pockets now. These were the stark warnings from the Government's own Poverty and Inequality Commission in response to the Scottish Budget. Deputy First Minister, if your own Poverty and Inequality Commission says that the poorest families in Scotland need money in their pockets now, what makes you think that they can afford to wait?
Deputy First Minister.
I acknowledge the seriousness of the issues that Richard Leonard raises. We have made it abundantly clear, and it's made clear from this position on a weekly basis, that poverty levels in Scotland are too high, and this government is determined to do all that we can to tackle that issue. Now, on the specific issue about an income supplement, the government has made clear we will report to Parliament before the conclusion of the parliamentary session at the end of this month, and the government will do that. But there are, of course, a whole range of different interventions that the government is taking forward to try to address the issue. And I'll set out some of them. Some of them are around the implementation of free school meals, where over 130,000 P1 to P3 children are benefiting from free school meals, or the £750 million Attainment Scotland Fund, or the investment that we make in the council tax reduction scheme, or the work that is in place and the investment that is in place to mitigate the effects of the welfare reforms that are being imposed upon the people of this country by the United Kingdom Government, or the Best Start grant, which of course has been applied and has delivered significant results already for individuals, meaningful results and impact for individuals across our country. So yes, there is more work to be done, but let me assure Richard Leonard and let me assure the Chamber that the Government is determined to do all it possibly can do to support individuals who live a life in poverty and to help them to work their way out of that life of poverty with active support from the Scottish Government.
Richard Leonard.
But is the Deputy First Minister seriously arguing that the Poverty Commission doesn't know about these initiatives he's just listed? They are making a point about the income supplement. But it's not just a question of welfare, Presiding Officer. Douglas Hamilton, the chair of the Poverty and Inequality Commission, only this week said of the Government's commitment to inclusive growth, and I quote, "Despite a high level of commitment to make this new economic agenda work, very little has changed. As a result, it appears to be more of a concept than an approach that results in real change in people's lives." Deputy First Minister, when will we get deeds and not just words?
Deputy First Minister.
I've just gone through with Richard Leonard a number of areas where we have undertaken deeds to tackle this particular issue, to recognise that the Government is taking a whole series of policy initiatives, many of which I've set out just now, which are making that impact, and which led, I would have to say, to some of the very positive endorsement of the work the Scottish Government is undertaking from the UN Special Rapporteur, who reported recently on the strength of the response of devolved administrations to the crisis that individuals face as a consequence of welfare reform. Now, as we look at the steps the Government takes through the Fair Work agenda, as we look at the investment we are taking through early learning and childcare, as we look at the investment that has been undertaken through the Best Start grants and the social security devolution that we're taking forward, these are all concrete deeds the Government is taking to address the issues of poverty that individuals face. We will do more, we are determined to do more, but we have to recognise we are doing that against a whole series of pressures that come towards us arising out of welfare reform and the decisions taken by the United Kingdom Government that are deeply damaging to the lives of individuals within Scotland.
Richard Leonard.
Well, the Deputy First Minister uses the word crisis. While the Government has been delaying the income supplement, child poverty in Scotland has continued to rise. While the Government has been offering up concepts, out in the real world, more people are queuing up at food banks. And only yesterday, a Child Poverty Action Group report produced by the IPPR concluded that the greatest reduction in child poverty relative to cost of any single option is achieved by addressing the two-child cap. Deputy First Minister, when will the Government, at long last, think about its moral responsibility? When will you finally use your powers to protect families in Scotland from the two-child cap? Or do you, John Swinney, still believe that families should be left to suffer in order to stop letting the Westminster Government off the hook?
Deputy First Minister.
That's what lets you down. Inability. What an appalling accusation to throw across the chamber of this Parliament. Exactly. When Richard Leonard puts to me the moral question is whether this Parliament should be dictated to by a Tory government.
Yes. That's the people of Scotland. Yes. That's the
That Richard Leonard is quite happy to keep in office, inflicting misery on the people of Scotland as a consequence of his unwillingness for this Parliament to take responsibility for these actions. Now, Richard Leonard needs to look no closer than the man sitting on his right-hand side who sat in the Smith Commission and refused point blank to devolve responsibility here to give us the powers to tackle these issues. So Richard Leonard has no right to trade moral responsibility with me across this chamber. He's walking across the road on the other side, doing nothing to take the powers into the hands of this Parliament to transform lives. He's happy to leave the Tories in charge. I most definitely am not.
Now, I appreciate this is an emotive subject, but I please recommend that members do not shout across the chamber. We've got 5 constituency supplementaries. The first from Mark MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Deputy First Minister will be aware that the administrators for Stoneywood Mill have ended their discussions with the preferred bidder and that the sale is no longer being taken forward. While this is understandably a major disappointment, a management buyout has now emerged as a potential means of securing the future of the business and the workforce. I plan to meet management tomorrow and understand that the Business Minister is meeting them today, and I'm advised that Scottish Enterprise are offering ongoing support. Can I ask the Deputy First Minister if the support Scottish Government can and will provide extends to financial support, and will the Scottish Government consider bringing a statement to Parliament laying out the support provided to date and the steps that will be taken to help secure the future of a profitable business and a skilled and dedicated workforce?
Deputy First Minister.
Presiding Officer, Mr MacDonald's last point is, I think, the most significant point, which is that this is a profitable site and there is a skilled workforce here. So there is, in the Government's view, it is perfectly possible for a viable business proposition to be brought forward, which is why the Business Minister was in Aberdeen this morning for those Stoneywood this morning for those discussions. It's why Scottish Enterprise are deeply engaged in all of these issues, and I give Mr MacDonald and the Chamber the assurance that the Government is doing everything we possibly can do with our agencies to make sure that all possible support can be made available. We obviously have to operate within the normal rules and in context with which Mr MacDonald will be familiar, but I give him the assurance that absolutely everything that possibly can be done to safeguard the future of the plant will be done. It has been a disappointment that the discussions with the preferred bidder have concluded, but there are active discussions about a management buyout, and the Business Minister will be happy to update Parliament in due course about the steps that have been taken to resolve this situation and to give certainty to the workforce of the paper mill at Stoneywood.
Neil Findlay, to be followed by Bob Doris.
Presiding Officer, I have been passed a consultation document that is not publicly available on the future provision of the out-of-hours dental service at St John's Hospital. 3 of the 5 options propose the partial or full closure of the service with a move to Edinburgh. This would leave West Lothian with no emergency dental service at our hospital. This follows the out-of-hours closures of the children's ward and the recent threat to the out-of-hours GP service. Why is it we are constantly having to fight proposals that would see services removed from St John's Hospital? And isn't this yet more evidence that workforce planning in the NHS is shambolic, it's failing staff and it's failing patients?
Deputy First Minister.
I'd point out to Mr Finlay that the children's ward has reopened in one of the issues that he raised there. Obviously, this is a consideration of a range of particular options. It would constitute a major service change if any of those options were to be taken forward. So there will be full and active involvement in consultation for all members of the public and members of Parliament in that process. But I make clear to Mr Finlay that the Government believes that there is a very strong necessity for there to be a wide range of services provided at St John's Hospital. It is critical that the sizeable population in the West Lothian area is supported by that broad range of services at St John's, and those issues will be uppermost in any consideration of these questions that the Health Secretary looks at in the period to come.
Bob Doris, to be followed by John Finney.
Deputy First Minister, around a year ago, a court granted my constituent supervised contact with his disabled son at a family contact centre in Glasgow. However, issued with disabled access toilet facilities means that contact has not taken place within that time. It may be that no contact centre within Greater Glasgow has appropriate disability-compliant facilities. I am unclear. Does the Deputy First Minister agree with me that it's wrong that family contact centres appear not to be subject to minimum standards such as disability access? Indeed, not to be subject to minimum standards such as disability access. Indeed, understand there is little regulation more generally regarding family contact centres. And will the Deputy First Minister seek to remedy such matters so parents, but more importantly children, can have appropriate contact and reduce parental alienation?
Deputy First Minister.
Presiding Officer, all public facilities should have appropriate disabled access for all individuals. So if Mr Doris is happy to provide the details of the situation to me, I'll make sure they are investigated by the appropriate minister and we will work to ensure that all possible remedies are put in place. But there should be no barriers to individuals being able to pursue their legitimate activities as a consequence of their disability, and I'll make sure the issues are looked at very carefully.
John Finn needs to be followed by Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Deputy First Minister will have heard the sad news that the Button newspaper is to cease publication this month, 165 years after publication commenced. The journalism jobs left Ireland some time ago, but the need for local news hasn't. Can the Deputy First Minister advise how the Scottish Government can support local journalism, particularly in our island communities?
I was very sorry to hear the news about the Butman, and it has, as Mr Finney says, had a long and distinguished history, and of course it is part of the firmament of and faithfully report activities and initiatives the length and breadth of the country. Obviously, these are private matters, these are private companies, but obviously the Government is happy to engage in wider work in this respect. The Culture Secretary, Fiona Hislop, was involved in discussing the role of journalism within our society and was making the point that we all rely upon a free and open press to make sure that there is proper reflection of local priorities and appropriate discussion of national, political and wider societal issues. So the Government supports very much the activities of local newspapers and are happy, I think we often do, provide lots of news for local newspapers to report on.
Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you. The Deputy First Minister will be aware that this week Scottish Borders Council is handing over an extra £3.2 million to the region's Joint Health Board, following continued concern over the state of the NHS Borders finances. At a recent meeting of the IJB, the board revealed it needs to make £11.7 million of savings in the financial year 2019-20. All this comes in a week when NHS Borders reported the worst average waiting time in Scotland for CAMHS. Young people on average waiting 22 weeks for treatment. Deputy First Minister, this is appalling. Can he commit today that the Scottish Government will properly fund NHS Borders, as the current financial situation is clearly unsustainable?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, obviously, NHS Borders will be funded through the financial arrangements that we have in place that distribute the largest NHS budget there has ever been in history to the Health Boards of Scotland, and Scottish Borders, NHS Borders will have their appropriate share of that, driven by the formula that's applied in this respect. Rachel Hamilton raises the significant issue around mental health services for young people. She will issue in expanding mental health services at a whole variety of different levels, whether that's through the expansion of the school counsellor network or whether that's about the expansion of mental health services through the National Health Service. So all of these different interventions will be taken forward to strengthen mental health services. And finally, I would make the point that on integration, health and social care integration at local level, this is a joint endeavour between the health service and local authorities to serve communities. It is important that there are open discussions about the financial requirements of that joint service. So the way that Rachel Hamilton characterises the handing over money from one body to another doesn't exactly get across the concept of partnership, which lies at the heart of the integration of health and social care. And she may know that one of the Conservative leadership candidates, Mr Rory Stewart, is looking very actively at the failures of integration of health and social care south of the border, and has reflected on some of the issues being taken forward here in Scotland in reflecting that sense of partnership. So perhaps before she bans language like that around the chamber, she should reflect on the importance of partnership between health and local government at local level.
Question number 3, Patrick Harvey.
May I join the other political parties in commemorating the actions of those who took part in the D-Day landings. And as we see the forces of the far right reinvent themselves in the UK, the US and so many other countries, too often aided and abetted by people in mainstream politics and media, we must remind ourselves that the fight against the far right is one every generation must be ready for if we're to properly remember and respect the memory of those who didn't return from that fight 75 years ago. At the end of April, the First Minister declared a climate emergency. So did the Welsh Government. Now, barely a month later, they have announced the welcome decision to scrap plans to build a £1.4 billion motorway relief road. Yet in Scotland, the Scottish Government is pressing ahead with spending £6 billion on dualling the A9 and A96. Since making her announcement, the First Minister has repeatedly said that when it comes to the policy changes that are needed, everything is under review. Does that include the next phases of these road projects?
Deputy First Minister.
Presiding Officer, Patrick Harvey has reflected on the issues that we all face in relation to climate change, and the Government has to take forward its agenda in a sustainable way. We have already made changes to our policy framework, with which he is familiar, through air departure tax, but the Government also has a duty to make sure that the country is equipped with the appropriate infrastructure that it requires to meet the needs of all of our population. Now, I think anyone who is familiar with the A9 and the A96 will know that both of these roads have, by their current construction and by the volume of use, very serious and alarming safety records. These issues have to be addressed as part of the Government's programme. The Government will do that, but all of those comments are set by me in the context of the absolute obligation on the Government to fulfil the climate change targets that we have set out, that we have committed to, that Rosanna Cunningham has made amendments, proposed amendments about to the current legislation to make sure we fulfil the commitments that we have given to Parliament and to the people of Scotland.
Patrick Harvey.
Well, the Deputy First Minister seems to disagree with the First Minister when she said that everything was under review. And he cites the problem of the volume of traffic use. The current plans will do nothing to control the issue of the volume of the use of those roads. The Scottish Government does have an opportunity to change direction here and redirect expenditure from road building into investment in a modern, affordable and efficient rail network. The single-track Highland Mainline Railway, which runs parallel to the A9, has been described as an antiquated embarrassment. Dualling that line and electrifying it could be done for far lower cost than the Government's road building scheme. It's over 10 years since the Scottish Government promised significant investment to ensure that railway travel to the heart of the Highlands is competitive with roads.
What I'd say to Patrick Harvey is that there are improvements that are being undertaken on the Highland Main Line as we speak. There has been structural change already undertaken on the line to ensure that the ability to deliver shorter journey times is made possible. Investment has been made through the ScotRail franchise in enhancing the rolling stock that's available for the Highland Line, and that has resulted in an expansion of capacity which transport passengers from Inverness to the Central Belt. So all of these investments are taking place to improve the attractiveness of the rail network, but clearly we have wider obligations to ensure that in every respect we are equipping the country with the connectivity that is required. The massive investment that's been put into digital connectivity is a huge benefit for the Highlands and the islands communities. These are advantages that we are delivering as part of a balanced package, but I stress they have to be done within the context of fulfilling the climate change targets that the Government is about to enshrine in law in the weeks that lie ahead.
Question number 4, Willie Rennie.
75 years on, I know many thousands of people woke up this morning and thought of those in their families who served and sacrificed so that we may live freely today. Now, the Education Committee said he was confused. Teachers said they had no real value. Parents in his own constituency boycotted them. The Teachers' Union wanted them scrapped. and Parliament instructed John Swinney to stop. That's national testing for 5-year-olds. Yet on Tuesday, he claimed the tests had been implemented without any difficulty whatsoever. On the very same day in London, Donald Trump claimed he only saw cheering crowds. 2 peas in a pod, both in denial. But isn't the truth that the national testing saga is symbolic of his performance as Education Secretary?
Deputy First Minister.
And I think that ridiculous question is symbolic of Willie Rennie's leadership of the Scottish Liberals. Because it really, I don't think, serves decent discourse in this Parliament for Willie Rennie to characterise these questions like that. Now, he can say what he likes to me. It's water off a duck's back to me. But I don't think it helps his credibility one iota. Now, on the question of Primary 1 assessments, the reason why I said that the assessments had been implemented without any difficulty was the fact that in the first year of the implementation of a complex IT project, and I would remind Parliament, sometimes the public sector has difficulties with IT projects, 650,000 assessments were undertaken the length and breadth of our country in 3,500 schools in Scotland. So that is the evidence that I would marshal to say that the Primary 1 assessments, the assessments had been undertaken without any practical difficulty. Now, the reason why I believe Primary 1 assessments to be valuable, and I'll say more about this in a statement to Parliament on Tuesday, which Willie Rennie will know that I am making, the reason why I believe them to be valuable is that I want to make sure teachers have access to resources that will inform their judgment about the progression of young people through the education system, because it does not serve young people well for any issues in their educational capacity not to be identified at the earliest possible opportunity. I thought this Parliament believed in early intervention. Primary 1 standardised assessments are about early intervention, and that's why they're valuable to young people around Scotland.
Willie Rennie.
John Swinney is ignoring the evidence again. He's not listening. Instead of bulldozing ahead, he needs to listen and scrap the test today. But there's a long list. The Pupil Equity Fund is underspent by £50 million. Audit Scotland say colleges have big financial problems. Recruitment for nursery education is way behind. 6 out of 10 teachers work more than an extra day every week, and over half of all teachers experience mental health issues because of their job. John Swinney was brought in as the big-shot troubleshooter for the First Minister's guiding mission. Does he really think he has met the First Minister's expectations when she appointed him to that job?
Deputy First Minister.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. I was just about to encourage some brevity so that we can get through some subsequent questions. I'll squeeze in a couple of supplementaries. The first from Jackie Bailey, then Gail Ross. Jackie
The
Bailey.
Deputy First Minister will be aware that millions of pounds of European funding could be withheld from voluntary organisations and local authorities across Scotland. Given that this could lead to employability projects closing, job losses and cuts to services for vulnerable people, why did the Scottish Government not heed the warnings more than a year ago? Because it is the Scottish Government's responsibility to administer the scheme. Why has nothing been done to avert this crisis? And will the Deputy First Minister act urgently and guarantee to fund the £22 million gap? I will accept an answer of yes.
Deputy First Minister.
Let me give Jackie Bailey slightly more detail. Jackie Bailey knows she's one of my favourites, so she would expect a bit more detail. First of all, can I acknowledge the importance of the issue and the manner in which it's been set out by Jackie Bailey, because this does affect the prospects of a number of third sector organisations upon whom we all rely in our communities. So we understand those concerns, we understand the concerns of local authorities. It's why we've been engaging in discussion with the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities on this question. And we are determined to avoid any charity or third sector body going out of business as a result of this particular issue. We have been doing a great deal on this. We have been in discussions with the European Commission to explore resolutions to the audit issues. Last Friday, we presented possible solutions to the European Commission, and we are awaiting a response. Now, we continue to make payments to projects unaffected by these issues, but I do assure Jackie Bailey that there is intense activity underway to resolve these questions and to give the type of security and certainty that third sector organisations are looking for. And of course, Ministers will be happy to update Parliament on these questions in due course.
I'm going to take one other brief supplementary, but Mr Swinney, it's rare that I say this, but some members can't quite hear you. So it's just when you're swivelling, so try and keep your remarks to the front. Gail Ross.
Thank you. Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today's National runs a letter from the Spanish government confirming it will not block an independent Scotland's entry to the EU. They confirm this has always been their position and that there is no queue to join the EU. Another Better Together scare story bites the dust. Now, I will leave it to the Herald to explain why they failed to publish a letter that they received some weeks ago. But can I ask the Deputy First Minister, does he welcome this intervention from Spain?
Deputy First Minister.
I better make sure that everyone hears this answer, Presiding Officer. Yes, I do welcome this intervention because it confirms the fact, as we have always known, that Spain would not block an independent Scotland from joining the European Union, and the confirmation from the Spanish government is very welcome in that respect. But of course, this comes alongside the demolition of a whole host of other scare stories that were put around in 2014, like having to vote no to protect our European Union membership, which of course we know how well that went. And then of course, members of the public in Scotland were told that they had to vote no to safeguard the future of the National Health Service. And we now see that Donald Trump is over here trying to get his hands on the National Health Service. Well, on the watch of this government, we're going to have nothing to do with that, but the same can't be said for the mess the Tories have got us into on Brexit.
Question number 5, Linda Fabiani.
To ask the Deputy First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to reports that children are still being held at Dungavel House.
Deputy First Minister.
Presiding Officer, if children are still being detained at Dungavel, a decade after the Home Office committed to ending this appalling practice, it would be completely unacceptable and a clear contravention of stated Home Office policy. The Scottish Government has repeatedly pressed the UK Government to implement more humane asylum and immigration systems. The Cabinet Secretary for Communities and Local Government wrote to the UK Immigration Minister on the 15th of May to express the Scottish Government's deep concerns following reports about the detention of children and pregnant women at Dungavel. She wrote on the 1st of April to support calls for a time limit on immigration detention. The Scottish Government is continuing to seek clarity from the Home Office regarding the detention of children in Dungavel.
Linda Fabiani.
Can I thank the Deputy First Minister for that answer, and can I ask him to cast his mind back to the Smith Commission, when all parties in that commission, as noted in the Smith Agreement, recommended that the operation of asylum support be devolved. Does the Deputy First Minister agree that having some responsibility for asylum and greater insight into what happens in Dungavel would mean that we could better protect vulnerable adults and children? And can he give this Parliament an update on progress towards that recommendation?
Deputy First Minister.
I do recall the discussions in the Smith Commission that Linda Fabiani raises. As a consequence of that, the Scottish Government held a number of discussions at official level with the Home Office in relation to the Smith Commission's proposals on asylum. Despite the recommendations made by the Smith Commission, the Home Office refused to accept the case for devolving asylum accommodation, financial support and advice, or on the question of being able to lodge an asylum claim in Scotland so that we could provide for a more dignified and humane system. Now, I suspect the fact that we were unable to make progress on what was an all-party agreement in the Smith Commission, agreed by all participants in the process, should perhaps come as no surprise to us, given the fact that the Home Office has been continually criticised for creating a hostile environment in this area of policy, which serves none of us well, and which is, in my view, a scar on the reputation of the United Kingdom and its welcome to people who face jeopardy in our world.
Question number 6, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to the Scottish Fiscal Commission prediction of a £1 billion shortfall in income tax receipts affecting the Scottish budget in the period 2020 to 2023.
Deputy First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I welcome and value the work done by the Scottish Fiscal Commission. As the Commission itself has made clear, significant uncertainty surrounds potential reconciliations. The true position cannot be confirmed until outturned data is available. The Government will decide how to manage any reconciliation as part of each budget. In this, we will be guided by the principles set out in the medium-term financial strategy, including over the use of limited reserve and borrowing powers at our disposal. While these forecasts have yet to be confirmed, what I can confirm is that if we had followed the Conservatives' income tax plans to offer cuts to higher earners, the impact on our budget this year would be around £500 million. If this persisted year on year, it could total around £2.5 billion by 2023-24.
Murdo Fraser.
Can I thank the Deputy First Minister for his response? Of course, in addition to the £1 billion black hole already identified, yesterday the Fiscal Commission told this Parliament's Finance Committee that the devolved social security costs could be substantially higher than the previously predicted £3.5 billion total. Now, these are very serious issues for the Scottish public finances, and the Scottish Government cannot deflect criticism elsewhere. The Deputy First Minister himself sat on the Smith Commission that signed up to tax devolution, and he also signed up to the fiscal framework, which determines the block grant adjustment, and which already, of course, protects the Scottish budget from slower population growth here compared to the UK as a whole. So what people want to know is this: how will these huge gaps in the public finances be filled? Will it be by cuts in public spending? Will it be by further tax rises on hard-working families? Or will it be both?
Deputy First Minister.
It's interesting in Murdo Fraser's supplementary comments that at no stage did he refer to the fact that in the Fiscal Commission's report that was published, it demonstrates over this period an increase on projected tax revenues since the last assessment was undertaken in December of £490 million. So, at no stage did Mr Fraser comment on the fact that there is actually, since December to June, a £490 million increase in the estimation of tax revenue to be generated in Scotland as a consequence, and also an increase in the tax take over that whole period of £3.5 billion. Now, as I indicated in my earlier answer, these are forecasts from the Fiscal Commission, which they themselves accept can go up or down. What we are certain about is if we'd followed the Conservatives, we'd be taking £500 million out of public expenditure today. That would be a disaster for their public services, and thank goodness an SNP government is here to protect Scotland from the Tories.
Question number 7, Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Deputy First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to recent figures showing that the number of women and girls playing football in Scotland has almost doubled in the last 5 years.
Deputy First Minister.
Presiding Officer, we want to see more people taking part in physical activity, so I'm pleased to see such a significant increase in the number of women and girls playing football. We have an excellent opportunity to further increase participation in our national game as Scotland's women's national team take part in the FIFA Women's World Cup for the first time. I know I speak for the whole Chamber when I say that the Parliament and the people of Scotland could not be prouder of Shelley Kerr, her staff and the squad. We will all be cheering them on every step of the way in the Women's World Cup.
Kenneth Gibson.
So I'd like to thank the Deputy First Minister for that answer and for stealing some of my thunder in terms of my supplementary question. I mean, I'm delighted that last October the Scottish Government allocated funding which allowed all members of the squad to train full-time from January 2019 through to the World Cup, and this can only have benefited our team. The First Minister was one of the record 18,555 people who, like me, was at Hampden to see Scotland's impressive 3-2 win over Jamaica last week. And does the Deputy First Minister once again want to indicate his confidence that the team will be very successful at the Women's World Cup in France and do Scotland very proud?
Deputy First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I think it would be impossible for me to steal the thunder of Kenneth Gibson on any occasion. Let me join Mr Gibson in extending our warmest wishes to Shelley Kerr and the team. The fact that so many supporters turned out in Hampden is an indication of the growing enthusiasm and support for the women's game. I think the stories that we've all heard about the pioneers of women's football, who were again celebrated and at the occasion of the match with Jamaica just last week, is an indication of just how far we have travelled on this question. So I know in amidst a First Minister's question time where there can be such rancour and division, I'm sure I can close it today on a moment of unity that we are all rooting for the women's team on Sunday. We wish them well in the whole of the competition, and I know for a certain fact they will do Scotland proud.
Thank you very much. A very good note to end on, and that concludes First Minister's questions. Apologies to the large number of members who didn't get a supplementary question today. We're going to move shortly.
Well, it's lovely to be out on such a sunny evening in Edinburgh, but it's a shame that we have to be out tonight protesting against the two-child cap and the rate clause, well more than a year since Alison Thewlis, my colleague at Westminster, first spotted it in the small print of a Tory budget.
Very glad to see such a huge demonstration today, and so many people still coming along 1 year after the rate clause came into force to show their opposition to this vile and despicable policy. The UK government have never been able to justify this policy, and we saw that this week with Esther McVeigh's pathetic attempts to say that the rate clause was somehow double support for women, and that gives them some kind of chance to talk about the most appalling and disturbing experience of their life.
As you can see behind me, we're at the very beginning of the All Under One Banner rally. You can obviously hear the pipers behind me as events are about to kick off.
It's time to aim high, look resolutely outwards, and never, ever accept second best. Above all, it's time to believe that we can. We can build that better country we know is possible. And friends, we will.
If you enjoy watching our programmes, please help us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster by signing up to become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter.
Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles, and all the opinions you'll need. Whether it's digital or by post, subscribe now to iScot.